I would like to open it. My name is Miusha Sever. I'm a Slovenian. Yet the last 8 years I have spent mostly in Central Asia. And starting with the Caucasus, I kept moving more to the east. I spent the last 6 years in Uzbekistan. Currently I'm in Afghanistan, so it's all about Central Asia. I am very, very happy that Bled Forum and Slovenia is finally putting a discussion about Central Asia on its international policy agenda. That said, it's not in the spirit of my philosophy. I think when we speak about Central Asia, we should first and most of all learn to listen to the Central Asians themselves talking about Central Asia. We only have one representative from Central Asia here today, Deputy Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan. I'm looking forward to his description of what Central Asia's vision for the future is. I definitely think that this region that includes countries like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, last but not least, is going to occupy our attention in the next 10 or 20 years. This might be an understatement coming from Kabul, but what we need to start with in our discussions is what are our expectations? What can we offer to this region? And how serious are we in offering what we can bring to the region? The question, of course, is usually when you talk about Central Asia, Mackinder said this is the heartland, the global heartland. It also has more than 60% of natural resources there, and whenever you talk about Central Asia, they say, oh yeah, natural gas, oil and all that. When they come to the ground, and I watched international delegations being engaged on the ground, they come in, they meet with 3, 4, 5, 6 people, they fly out, and that's it. I'm trying to be provocative to start a more serious discussion, but I would like to open the panel with introductions of our respected guests. One of them from Central Asia, the others are Europeans representing different organizations, UN, ODIHR, and everybody knows former Foreign Minister of Slovenia, former Foreign Minister of Slovakia, now all engaged in different international organizations, UN, OSCE, ODIHR, Deputy Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan, OSCE representative, also former Foreign Minister of Serbia, and Mr. Deletro, the famous international crisis group, who keeps reminding us about ongoing and upcoming crises. So it should be an interesting discussion. In line with my philosophy, I would like to give a word to the sole representative of Central Asia. Please share your vision, your view about the region and the world out there. So take the time you need.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for the attention to the region, to Central Asia, for coming, especially for this panel. I think it's really one of the most interesting ones during this very well-organized conference. I'm quite happy that during this panel I have also some friends sitting nearby. And actually, let me assure you that they are really an excellent experts on the region. I can tell it about all of them, starting with Mr. Kubish, who you know proved that it's even possible to step in the same river twice. I'm talking about Kyrgyzstan. Then, you know, we were talking about the representatives of Europe, Central Asia, but let us not to forget that at least 4 panelists here are more or less involved also with the OSCE issues. I am here not just in the capacity of Deputy Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan, but also as a special envoy of the chairman in office of the OSCE. Mr. Svilanovich, you know, he is responsible for the second dimension in the organization. Mr. Kubish used to be Secretary General in the organization, and we also have representative of ODIHR here, and they are, you know, playing a major role, in particular in the upcoming events in Kyrgyzstan. So I'm absolutely assured that we'll try to do our best in order to answer your questions. I would like to underline, first of all, the geopolitical importance of the region. It's not because of the, let me say, modern situation. It always was very much important, even if we go in the 18th century, which, you know, normally is the century which some experts start the so-called the big game on Central Asia. You know that there is a number of very interesting books. I'll start probably with some books of Mr. Brzezinski about the region and about the big political game in the region. But now I think that the geopolitical importance of the region has dramatically increased during the last couple of decades. First of all, yesterday, for example, you know that a lot of people addressed to the importance of so-called BRIC countries. Let us not to forget that 3 of these BRIC countries are neighbors of Central Asia. I mean Russia, China, and India. You know that Central Asia has common borders with Russia and with China. At least Kazakhstan, you know, has 7,591 kilometers borders with Russia. This is the longest border in the world between 2 countries. Also, Kazakhstan has 1,700 kilometers border with China, and the same story about the others. Then, you know that there is another country in the region, Afghanistan. If we are talking about the so-called small Central Asia, normally we are talking about 4 countries. It's Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. About bigger Central Asia, it's plus Kazakhstan. And when we are talking about so-called big Central Asia, so it's plus Afghanistan, definitely. Then, again, going back to my capacity as the special envoy of the chairman in office of the OSCE, let me remind you that Afghanistan is also the partner country for the OSCE. And Afghanistan is a partner country which also has borders with 3 members of the OSCE. And with one of them, for example, with Tajikistan, the longest border. It's mostly in the mountains, but this is a really very long border. And the Tajiks, they have a lot of work to do with this border. Another very important point that just recently in July, 18 years ago, this region and mostly 5 Central Asian countries joined to the OSCE. You know, it happened in Helsinki on the 10th of July in 1992, and I'm quite happy that I witnessed this. I was a part of Kazakh delegation at that time. In that time, I was a foreign advisor to the president of Kazakhstan. And so we joined to the organization in 1992, as all the other countries of Central Asia. And not only because of this, I think, but because of the real development of the situation. Now we are talking about not just Euro-Atlantic security. Now we are talking about Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security when we have deal with the security under the umbrella of the OSCE. And starting our chairmanship in January this year, we always tried to push ahead this idea that the security for the OSCE now it's increased from Euro-Atlantic to Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security. And during recent informal ministerial in Almaty, practically all countries of the OSCE already agreed that this is time already when we should operate this definition, Eurasian and Euro-Atlantic, or Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security. Then what I also would like to underline that definitely you know that Kazakhstan is the first ever country, not only from Central Asian region, but also from CIS countries, which now is in charge of this major international Euro-Atlantic organization. And so, of course, you do understand that it was very important for us to draw proper attention to the problems of the region when we started our activity as a chairman in office. So we tried to do our best, and you know that we immediately said that Afghanistan would be one of the main priorities for our chairmanship in the organization. And it was quite a clear message, which, by the way, was approved by the chairman in office. And let me say that during our chairmanship, the State Secretary, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Saudabayev, has already visited Afghanistan 3 times, and he also took part in 2 conferences specially dedicated to Afghanistan issues in London in the end of January, and in July, on the 20th of July, in Kabul. And also, if you are very much interested in this, I have with me the perception paper of Kazakhstan for Afghanistan. This is quite an impressive program of Kazakhstan for the further development in this country, in Afghanistan. It was more or less approved by our partners in the organization as a very good basis for the further discussions on the way to the summit of organization in the end of this year, on the 1st and the 2nd of December. And finally, in order not to abuse your time and my time, I also let you know that, of course, you do understand that sometimes, not sometimes, but probably always, it's impossible for any head of any organization to predict all challenges which he will be facing during the leadership of the organization. The same story happened with our chairmanship in the organization, and of course you have a guess, I'm talking about Kyrgyzstan. When we tried actually to draw proper attention to the problems of our regions, to Afghanistan, to economic and ecological issues, to environmental issues like Aral Sea, to transport issues, and so on. Of course, you know, we could not predict the dramatic development in our neighboring country in Kyrgyzstan. And from the very beginning, we tried immediately to do a lot in order to keep more or less stability in this country. And now you know that we have problems not only in Afghanistan, but we have problems only in the other Central Asian country, in Kyrgyzstan. I'm absolutely assured that all of us further will discuss this issue properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To be fair to all our respected panelists, I just want to start from left to right. Mr. Kubish, I believe you can talk about the dimension of United Nations and its engagement in the region, but of course you also were special representative in both in EU and OSCE capacity. So maybe you can give us a general description of Western engagement or global engagement in the region.
Thank you very much, and I'm really very much pleased that we have this panel and that we speak about the region, wider region of Central Asia, because I believe that in the coming period this is one of the most attractive, quote unquote, one of the most problematic, one of the most dynamic regions in the world. One of the reasons is that things are changing. Yesterday, General Powell said something to that extent when he commented on the situation at the end of the Cold War. Now we see another major sea change here. It's just enough to have a look at the impact of the global economic and financial crisis, trends in economic development, positioning of different countries, changing of the balance of economic and definitely it means also political and other power. If you look at the situation, BRIC countries were mentioned, but more from the economic perspective. But we should not forget that there are serious political and security implications, at least in the future. So you see a sea change. And of course, regions that were in the backyard long time ago, even after the fall of the totalitarian regimes and after the dissolution of certain structures and countries, they were still in the backyard of the global attention, political attention. That's partly a response in the backyard of attention of quote-unquote Western countries. Have a look at who was present in Central Asia in the 90s. Basically, it was the UN system and then individual countries, not more. The EU was missing. Others, they didn't pay attention that much. Now the situation is changing greatly. And you see sometimes perhaps too much attention of all sorts of powers, regional, but also global powers. And we will witness this. The main factor, in my opinion, that will influence the situation in the future is the factor of Afghanistan. All what is happening will be happening there. I believe that all of us, again, yesterday detected some notes of concern in at least two statements. One, it was the statement of President Danilo Turk when he spoke about Afghanistan, and I tried to put it down when he said, leaving the country in shambles and chaos is not exit and is not a strategy. And he was speaking about Afghanistan. And then the words of General Powell, when he described the situation there with all the challenges. And when he mentioned, yes, the plan of President Obama to start withdrawing the troops is there, but it's the start of the withdrawal. Afghanistan is going and is influencing a lot. First of all, indeed, everyone registered that there is a plan to nationalize the country, to give more power, to give decision-making to the authorities of the country, to the president, parliament, government, etc. And indeed, NATO, the alliance, etc., is looking at how to go in this transition in an orderly way, but nevertheless, leaving the country. Many other countries of the region took note of this statement and are speculating, okay, who will be the next Supremo? And again, it's not a secret. This is sometimes being discussed at the level of presidents, prime ministers in the region. It's changing the perspective. To whom to turn in case something is happening? Who will help us? Is it the United States? For the time, perhaps. But Russia is coming back to this game. China is coming, at least economically. Then you have other neighbors of this region. And I'm very glad, by the way, that Minister Zhigalov mentioned and described Central Asia in its broader perspective, including also Afghanistan. Because for a number of reasons, this is, in my opinion, the right approach. You can speak political, you can speak security reasons, but of course you must speak also reasons like water and energy. Water is something that is shared. Water is one of the potential element of cooperation, but unfortunately water is also the element with a strong conflict potential. There was a panel just before this one, and there was a discussion about this. And the tension is there, it's not disappearing. And so far, because of the situation in Afghanistan, no one included Afghanistan into any serious discussion about water resources. But the time is coming. We need to do this, about energy, etc. So it will bring not only the perspective, but also a major controversy. Because at this point of time, it's difficult to speak about water and energy nexus when engaging 5 Central Asian countries. And now we need to add Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as a factor of change, means that people now talk about how to include back to the structures of governance the Taliban. It will happen. I think that to expect a major change in the approaches of Taliban, in their views, is unrealistic. They might behave more moderately. They might try to get in. Most likely it's inevitable to work with them. But a major change of their ideology, I have my question mark. What does it mean? Look at Central Asia. Look at the history of Central Asia. Look at the civil war in Tajikistan. Look at the activities of many other movements, and they are appearing and reappearing, disappearing, rebirthing, etc. So the trends are there. I'm not saying that this is the major factor in what was happening in Kyrgyzstan, but a small part of that is there, present as well. But it's not a major factor. I beg to disagree with those that are seeing only the hand of outside forces in what happened in Kyrgyzstan. Because what happened in Kyrgyzstan is very much the impact and the result of non-functioning state. You can use other terminology. In Afghanistan, you have, in my opinion, an example of a non-functioning state. Central power might be central. Does it have influence over the country? Well, ask the Afghans. Go there. In Kyrgyzstan, the provisional government, you must ask yourself, what is the degree of control of the provisional government over the country, notably over the south of the country? And what will happen after the election? The election is another point. It's a part of good governance, good political governance. It's not a solution at this point of time. You had in too many cases in the region elections as a model, as an approach that were followed, that brought certain results that were then contested. And I don't see any major development for the better at this point of time. I don't know what will happen in Afghanistan. It's a crucial factor. But the predictions are that most likely the parliament that will emerge will be more moderate, let's call it like this, vis-à-vis the president. Would it help to govern the country? I don't know. One must ask the question. There will be the election in Kyrgyzstan soon. Will that bring the necessary stability? I don't know. We hope. We need to support the election. And then it's the matter of sustainable development as such. We very often forget about that element. We speak about security, we speak about crises, we speak about political turmoils, we speak about military bases, we speak about everything, influences of Russia's and China's, etc., etc. But it's people who are living there in sometimes very difficult conditions. More and more often, they are challenged by natural catastrophes and sometimes man-made catastrophes. The assistance is not there. Very weak state, lack of support, economic donor support, political from the outside, because everyone is focusing on the immediate challenges. But we will need to deal with this, because again, part of the problem of Kyrgyzstan was, the recent one, that people, they had enough of the corrupt regime. Corruption is a very strong element in many countries, endemic element. And they were fed up with the strongly deteriorating and rapidly deteriorating of their social and economic situation. Is there an improvement? Ask yourself. In Kyrgyzstan, I'm not sure that I see it. And I'm coming back to the then global situation, global economic crisis and the position of these countries in the world. To help them, and here I'm coming to your question, is just to help them. That's partly, not only, partly the role of the international community. The United Nations system has been there since the very beginning. It was the first one to be on the ground in a way. Open different presences, offices, UNDP, UNICEF, etc., UN houses. It's coming with a complex approach, depending on the mandates of different organizations. Now I am very, very glad that as of recently, some 2 years ago, the UN system added one more element. It's the Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy in Central Asia. It's a new structure and already proving how valuable it is to have such a political platform, because it is a political platform that serves as a basis where the countries of the region can talk to each other at different levels, including at a very high level, can engage in trying to address maybe some particular issues, because of course some of the issues they don't like to bring to the attention of the internationals, but at least some particular very topical issues with the help of the international structure and with the help of notably the United Nations as balanced, unbiased, neutral agency, but with opinion. It's neutral in a sense that the UN is closing eyes on what is happening here and there. But it's neutral because it's not taking sides. So this is one. Of course, there are other structures. I'd like to mention the OSCE. I'm very glad that we have Minister Zhigalov here, because this is the first time that a Central Asian country, a post-Soviet, I'm sorry that I'm using this old terminology, but it's the fact of life still, post-Soviet country is chairing this organization that is so crucial for the developments not only in this region, but in particular perhaps in this region, because it's dealing with all sorts of issues: military security, sustainable development, economic environment, etc., values and human rights, including building of democratic structures, and notably good governance, political, economic, etc. In a modest way. They cannot do miracles, but they try. And they have local presences. And they have an increasing support. And now they have an increased credibility, because they are under the chairmanship of Kazakhstan, one of the peers, one of the countries in the region, with many deficiencies. No one can say that Kazakhstan is perfect. Kazakhstan is not perfect, but is bringing a very good experience of a managed process of modernization. You can agree or disagree, but it's always better to manage political processes than to let them go and then you have explosions. So this is a good example. And a country with that is also having, okay, political pluralism with constraints, civil society with constraints.
Mr. Kubish,
And
your
others.
time is running out. You've
Very
got
good.
2 minutes.
And then the last point, okay, you can, well, 2 points. You have the European Union. We can speak about the role of the European Union. I'm not representing the European Union, but it's true that I was the first EU special representative for Central Asia. So I can say at least the EU has been moving as well. But it's true that it's moving only now. I hope very much that the Lisbon Treaty and that what the treaty is bringing to the EU, instruments to finally beef up the ambitions, political ambitions that are there, will make a change. You have many other organizations, but we should not forget, we have sub-regional organizations, organizations of the countries. And here I would like just to express my hope that they will be more functional, more supported by the parties, because up until now you have ups and downs, creation and implosion, withdrawals and rebirth, but we still miss good functioning structures of regional cooperation engaging Central Asian countries, effective, although there are some of them, Eurozes, CSTO, etc. So thank you very much. Sorry for taking too much of your time, but you asked me, I tried to give some views on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kubish. I believe it allows good point for discussions. But let's turn, Dr. Furlitz just came out of Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan crisis was the main reason why this panel made it into the main agenda. So let's hear about that, your views.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seva. To me, it's a privilege to sit in a company of an expert on Central Asia, since it would be too ambitious to claim that I am an expert on security aspects of the Central Asia. Nevertheless, I was there as the head of the OSCE ODIHR referendum observation mission between 50 days, between 21st of May and 8th of July. And that includes 10th of June, when in the south of the country violence burst out. And let me take you down to the grassroots of it. Though nowadays it is very difficult to find who actually initiated this violence. There are several theories, and some of the actors are reluctant to go deeper into the analysis of what has happened. We had in the area of Osh and Jalalabad at that time 2 long-term observers, 2 in each city, and we are able to recover them in most dramatic circumstances that actually led us further on to an analysis of the security conditions, since nobody, neither provisional government nor anyone else, could give us a guarantee that 150 short-term observers that will come to observe the referendum elections could be given any kind of security. And that's why we concluded that the format of the observation mission should be changed from a normal one to a limited one, where only long-term observers were kept in the area, except in these troubled places. In spite of the fact that the actual purpose of violence was to disturb the peaceful conduction of the referendum, introducing change constitution of a country, in spite of the fact in the Osh area and the majority of the polling stations was destroyed, in spite of the fact that the documentation was somehow lost, the most of the precinct election commission simply vanished, and the most of the documentation, as I said, was destroyed. referendum with 72% of attendance and 90% of the agreement with the new draft constitution showed that the people in Kyrgyzstan had enough of former experience with two authoritarian corrupted regime, and they wanted to have a change. Whether this is a democracy, it's a question. They have opted for a semi-parliamentary democracy, which leaves president still with some of the key duties. Nevertheless, Kyrgyzstan is now on the way, on a rather precarious way to democracy, which is, for Central Asia, certainly, should I say, an experiment. It is questionable whether it will actually succeed. Neither the neighboring states, nor the big powers like Russian Federation or China, are very happy with this development. The intermediate neighbors are run by autocratic systems with some more or less pronounced democratic facade. But there are still authoritarian regimes. And in Moscow we have heard that present development is a wrong one, and the country, as Kyrgyzstan or Kyrgyz Republic properly, needs an authoritarian strong personality and a regime that will actually bring country back into order. If we think of the actual structure of the country, in my personal opinion, most of the helping countries are neglecting a simple fact that is actually presented to us from the national symbol. Sun with 40 rays. 40 rays represent 40 clans. And clan structure is hidden, it's not very visible, but a very effectual way of running the country, and it is still being done. This should not be forgotten, and whoever comes to country, and perhaps to introduce novelties to some extent foreign to the people, they tend to be traditional, is making a very serious mistake if it does not take into account the clan structure and show necessary respect to the traditionalism. Subtle approaches are appreciated, and forceful instructions, which are still, some of them are in place, are simply rejected and ignored. And rightly so. An elephant can do quite a lot of damage in the porcelain shop. The overall security situation in Kyrgyzstan at the moment is precarious. There are positive and also negative aspects of it. One of the positive sides is that everyone, including Western Eastern powers, not to mention international organizations, are making endeavors to keep stability in the country as high as possible. Afghanistan as a trouble area is enough and more than enough. The principal basis for cooperation between UN agency, OSCE, EU, and SCO and CSTO are given. So in respect, this is a positive side that the needs for a cooperative effort are there. I have witnessed for the first time in my life an excellent cooperation between the countries that were, between the organizations that were delivered humanitarian help to Kyrgyzstan. Usually they step each other on the toes, but this time the activity was extremely well coordinated and run, except for the fact that it was physically not possible to deliver humanitarian help to those that actually needed it. whoever, whoever treats the violence clashes in the south of the country as ethnic clashes makes a mistake. This would be a simplification which is not allowed. The structure of these clashes is extremely complex, and Mr. Kubish already mentioned some of them. It's actually fight for existence, fight for money, fight for market, fight for water, land, and so on and so forth. Now back to the situation in Kyrgyzstan. On the negative side, chaotic situation is desired ground for operation of organized crime gangs. We should not forget that the Kyrgyzstan is a crossroad for many very important roads. One is Silk Road, running west to east. Another one runs from south to north, and it's based mainly on arms and drugs. The provisional government was actually not and still not in position to control the whole situation. The security force, including the police, were at least halved by the events of the 6th of April. You should not forget that the police was using live rounds to calm the demonstrations, which had, of course, very opposite effect. And this is actually police that do not enjoy any kind of public respect anymore, which is, of course, impossible to tolerate. And the police force in Kyrgyzstan should certainly be rebuilt, retrained, and the proper rule of the public, to the public will be reached for the police force only gradually. The army that was also called to help is certainly not suited to calm down the civil unrest. Their loyalty to the provisional government is questionable. They were sent into the troubled areas with wrong equipment, not trained to do so, and in addition to that, without proper supplies, including food. And what happened? These soldiers were hungry and provided themselves, and they were armed with some food. They were actually joining mobs in looting. In this respect, the provisional government of Kyrgyzstan needs standing international support to bring the country back into the controllable, lawful position. And there are no reasonable alternatives. We are actually watching what I defined as an experiment, route to democracy, and it is questionable whether it will be a successful one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feretz. I would like to give the next panel exposure to Mr. Sulanovic, who can speak about the OSCE and the actual ground engagement planned for the future.
Thank you very much. Coming from the Balkans, I thought that in the last 2 years, through my involvement with the OSCE, in particular Central Asia, I'm going to find many similarities, although, of course, I was hoping for some differences. Well, I've learned a lot, not enough, maybe, but I would like to share what I've learned with you and would like to keep as open attitude towards the open issues as I did while I was speaking about the issues related to the region I come from or to the country I come from. Therefore, I would like to say that it is my impression that we are discussing about the region, the countries, 5, 6, if you add Afghanistan, which are in a complex process. It is, in my eyes, three-folded process. One, it is a nation-state building or a state-building process. But these countries are also involved in a difficult politically sensitive and a complex process of regional cooperation. And the third is that they're also positioning themselves individually and as a region on the global arena and the global scene. And if I would put the labels, I would say that what differentiates these countries and the other regions, including the region I come from, is extreme richness in resources. But then there are some similarities, and this is, for instance, that this extreme richness of resources is accompanied by democracy deficiency, and there we are close to the Balkans again. The third, I would say, is that it is strange to say, but a relative isolation of the region. I say it is strange to say because we are discussing about the region which is to the south of Russia, to the west from China, to the north from Afghanistan and Turkey, and to the east from European Union. But this is still my impression, a relative isolation. The EU was mentioned. There is only one document, as far as I am aware, relevant for the EU policy towards Central Asia, and this is done during the German presidency of the EU and is now the EU strategy. And I appreciate the document, but I would say that the European Union, if I dare say, coming from outside the Union, it's far from being implemented decisively. But these would be the label, and I would add the fourth label, and this is Afghanistan, which is a very complex issue with a huge influence. I would also say that this region is increasingly relevant because of the potential I mentioned, but we have to understand the complexity. And the complexity I have in mind also when I try to approach the engagement of the OSCE. The OSCE has established its presence in 1994 for the first time in Tajikistan with the aim of dealing with the region in order to support the regional cooperation, to support the state-building process, but also to engage with other actors on the scene, particularly with other international organizations. Today, what do we do is, and what we've done in the meantime, is I would like to mention that, of course, number one would be the fact, and it was pointed out by Deputy Minister Zhigalo, but also by Jan Kubiš, and this is that we have a successful chairmanship of Kazakhstan of the OSCE. I say successful, not the fact that they are chairing the organization, but the fact that they were able to bring the organization to a summit, which we were lacking for the last 10 years since Istanbul. Therefore, we already may say it was a successful chairmanship. It is going to be, irrespective of the outcome of a summit. We need it, and it's good we are going to have it. Second, it is that in 2009, the OSCE has formed border management staff college in Dushanbe, and it is important to say that in the board of this college, international organizations are represented. Then there is also OSCE Academy in Bishkek, and it is important to say that in the board of the academy, countries from the region have been represented, all of them. And then I may say a few more words on what my office is doing. We are busying ourselves with water and energy nexus, which was mentioned, and I would say that the scarcity of resources is, particularly when it comes to water and energy, in the region which is enormously rich in oil, gas, and water when it comes to Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, still an issue. The scarcity is one of the potentials for conflict, but also one of the potentials for a huge development in future, and I would like to insist on a huge development. So there are successes. Again, I would mention Talas Commission, which brought together Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and I would see this as a model for further cooperation in the field related to water management, because this is a very good example how the countries can cooperate with each other. I would like to say that there is a very relevant and important, not yet mentioned, International Fund for the Saving of Aral Sea, the regional organization which brings all 5 countries There are difficulties. They are in the process of restructuring. I would like to pay respect to the partner in the process, and this is UN Under Secretary General, Mr. Yancha, and the Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy, who have engaged all 5 countries in the process of discussing where do we go, how do we really establish a regional organization which would be dealing with not only RLC, but the complex issues related to water management in the region. I would also like to pay respect to other partners in this process, European Union, of course, European Commission, World Bank, UNDP, UNEP, but in particular, I would like to mention the involvement of GTZ, which is very well represented on the ground and really engaged there in the issues related to the water and water management. This is also what is the engagement of my office. And I'll briefly tell you that we do respect, the aim of my office is to bring the countries together on the issues related to water management and to end up with the regional organization like IFAS, restructured, but very successful and supported by everyone. But we do respect sensitiveness and complexity. Therefore, what we do now is we engage to the OSCE presence, and there is an OSCE presence in each of this, in every country in the region. On a bilateral level, we are working on increasing capacity related to water management, fighting corruption. That's a very important issue, of course. And we do in every country similar projects, hoping that at a certain point there would be a momentum to take and to get closer to a real regional cooperation. I would also like to say that what we are involved is nuclear waste, so there is a legacy to deal with. Nuclear waste, pesticides. And I think that in the coming months, actually very soon in October, there is going to be a presentation of these issues done by the personal representative of the Chairmanship in Office, member of European Parliament, Struan Stevenson, and this would, I would say, increase the awareness of how important are environmental issues in this region and how close they are linked with the security issue that we are discussing today. Besides, we are engaged in a good governance, rule of law, anti-money laundering, transparency, anti-corruption projects in the region, and also migration. And migration is a very important theme for everyone who would like to assess the stability issues in the region, respecting the fact that Kazakhstan is a recipient country in this case, but all others are basically countries from which people are moving to work abroad, Kyrgyzstan in particular, Tajikistan also, but also Uzbekistan, and these issues need to be addressed, and the OSCE is not the single actor in this respect, but is working closely with each other. And then I would like to mention the transport. When I mentioned the relevance and the richness of the region, I also had in mind the fact that this region is a bridge between, in marketing terms, in market terms, in business, between China and European Union. So if you want to bring markets together, you have to go through Kazakhstan, then Russia as well, of course, but also this is a Silk Road area, and we need to respect and to engage in this field. This is why I would insist on the relevance in this respect. I would like to end up by pointing out how do I see engagement of all international actors. Now I have in mind the states around, but also international organizations with which the OSCE is partnering. I would say that there is a need to focus on the project developed by the OECD. It's called Central Asia Initiative, which is aiming towards a regional trade agreement. We need to help. The OSCE is ready. We were instrumental in 2006 when the project was launched, and we'll continue cooperating with OECD in this respect. So the trade is one area. Transport is another area. I would like to add to this, of course, energy sector, but I think it would be not fair to end the list of what would be the interest of international organizations, what would be the interest of other partners, international community states, when it comes to this region, without mentioning that we need to engage in people-to-people contact. And there, I think, is a huge minus. I'm not playing the game, which is called the blame game, But we need to use the time in front of us to engage in a people-to-people contact. That deals with the visa issue, that deals with the border management, custom management, because one of the avenues for next 10 years, and this is what we are dealing with, should be engagement in the field of education. And I think that there I've seen almost nothing during the last 2 years. The engagement of international community in sharing the knowledge, technology, but also knowledge, in engagement with the youth in this region. To this respect, I would like to pay respect to the Kazakhstan, which is actually establishing the youth center for the region to bring together the youth of the region. So my last points before we engage later on in the debate would be that we need to engage in a people-to-people contact. We need to invest in education in order to honestly appreciate each and every individual country, because they are different in spite of similarities. They are different and they need to be respected as different. But we, of course, and I would like to say it openly, would profit from more of intense cooperation between them and more of a regional attitude in addressing the issues that are around the region. I've started with similarities and differences with the Balkans, and I've learned how different the region is. For us, it was much easier after the split up of former Yugoslavia because there was the magnet of the EU, which was a decisive factor in bringing the countries together through a stability pact to their, today it's Regional Cooperation Council. We don't have this magnet when it comes to Central Asia. We have different magnets, and I mentioned them: Russia, China, Afghanistan. Magnets have two poles, frankly. I mentioned Afghanistan, but I also have in mind the illicit trafficking, which is a threat to the region. I also, while mentioning Afghanistan, have in mind Islamist networks, not necessarily extremist, but still, which are also seen in the region as a threat. So we need to be aware of these complexities and the multipolarity of the magnets around the region, and should try to use the decade in front of us if we want to appreciate the relevance, and I insist on this, and the richness. We need to engage in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Svilanovic. Last but not least, International Crisis Group, Mr. Deretro.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairman. I'll try to share with you a few points of what I see as the upcoming challenges for the region, trying to think, as you asked us to do, in 10 years, a framework of 10 years, which is, as Vice Minister Zhigalov already pointed out, pretty difficult. But I think there is something almost sure, is that in the next 10 years, at least I hope, in the two most significant countries of the region, that is Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, there will be a change of leadership, I believe. Maybe not for political reasons, but for biological reasons. And I think in these two countries, this will be a very central moment. Either this change of leadership goes peacefully, without bloodshed. I would even say for Kazakhstan, with a semi-democratic process. Unfortunately for Uzbekistan, presently, we cannot even hope that. Or it will go through clanic disputes that could turn out violent. And for Uzbekistan, I think we cannot right now exclude completely that there will be bloodshed in that process. So I think for these two countries, that will be central. And whenever I come to the Balkans, what strikes me here is the age of the political class. You have the feeling that in the Balkans, you have now a political class that is framed intellectually by other means than most leaders in Central Asia have been framed with for the moment. So I think this will be crucial, and we will have to follow that. Now, I think one of the biggest challenges also, that has been already mentioned by many speakers, is regional cooperations. These states today hate to cooperate. I'm sure my friend Vice Minister Zhigalov will try to correct me, because Kazakhstan is probably the one country that has tried most to foster cooperation in the region, but concretely, they already have agreements for free movements of goods and people in the region, but try any of you to cross the border between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, for instance. Of course, Uzbekistan has set up the most difficult border management system in the region, and I would be a bit severe with Tashkent and say that this very difficult border management system is putting de facto the economy of Tajikistan under embargo. It is very difficult for Tajiks to export anything towards Kazakhstan and Russia because any time the Uzbek border can be closed down. And I experienced that myself last time I was there. I arrived at the Uzbek border. I could see about 15 trucks filled up with vegetables and fruits that were stuck at the border in the summertime because they couldn't get through. So this is a big challenge, and I won't mention all the other issues linked with this challenge that the other speakers have already mentioned, like, of course, water management. You see now growing tensions constantly between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, but the relationship with Kyrgyzstan on that issue is not simple either. And even though up to now, all the technical people involved in managing the water resources of the region have still all gone to the same schools, the Soviet school, still all speak the same language and have the same understanding, they are facing huge political difficulties. Well, the other challenge that I would see mentioned by all of the speakers already, indeed, is the difficult neighborhood, particularly Afghanistan, and now this huge problem in Kyrgyzstan. I think Kyrgyzstan is really a bomb for the region. And it is a bomb because of Afghanistan, and I fully agree with Minister Kubish that in what happened in Osh and Jalalabad in the summer, you didn't have Afghans, Talibans in the region, but what you had was the huge influence of narcotic trafficking money from Afghanistan in the region. And even though it is extremely dangerous to make comparison from one region of the world to the other, you all know that ICG is very active also in Latin America. It strikes me to see how the drug trafficking from Afghanistan is tackling in Central Asia now, the weakest country, destroying the state institutions in almost the same way that you see the cocaine trafficking from Colombia, destroying first the state institutions in the smaller Central American states, and now of one big NAFTA member state like Mexico. So I think, and I am very disappointed, Minister Zhigalov, by the lack of attention of the countries of the region of what happened in Kyrgyzstan, the lack of political will of the OSCE to do something more than send in 52 policemen. Sorry, I have a lot of respect for the police, but was it at stake there is much more. We'll need much more than 52 policemen, and I'm extremely disappointed by the lack of will to do anything serious by the two big powers that have military bases in that country, that is the US and Russia. And if southern Kyrgyzstan is not dealt with seriously now, try to keep in mind my comparison with the Americas. You first saw Guatemala going down the drain, El Salvador, and now huge Mexico, and I did not even mention the drug wars 3 years ago in the very lung, economic lung of South America, this drug war that we witness on the streets of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So I think for Kazakhstan, for Russia, and for the European Union, because the conception of the heroin coming out of Afghanistan is done also in the EU, this is certainly the biggest challenge for the moment. I think if we look at the geostrategic moving plates in the region, one of the big chances for the region is now its openness to international markets. And I would even say the interest that China is showing to the region. If you look at the official high-level summit, China is taking Central Asia very seriously. Almost once a year, you have a senior, each of the senior politicians from each country going to China. Just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, China worked quickly and efficiently to resolve all border issues. And I think I'm not mistaken to say that in the 2,000 years of China's history, this is probably one of the few times in their history when this Xinjiang border is settled without any disputes. China has done something that no other diplomacy has managed to do, is to get an agreement with Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, so two of the most complicated governments in the region, and Kazakhstan, to build a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to China through these two other countries that will open soon. If you look, when we were talking about infrastructure, roads and railways, if you look at what happens now in the region, you see clearly, if you look at the map, a reorientation of the northern routes towards China. Who is building the railways? Who are building the roads? It is China. So it is a huge chance for the region. I have the feeling that only Kazakhstan deals with that well. Kazakhstan has politicians who have been educated in China, who know China, and who speak Chinese. In the other countries, there is a mixture of fear and mistrust, and they don't know exactly how to deal with this. For the other powers in the region, the NATO member states, the biggest one of them, of course, the United States, are making, in my view, a huge mistake right now. They see Central Asia only under the prism of the northern corridor towards Afghanistan, and that's it. And Russia, I think for those who believe that Russia would still be very present, very active, very involved in the region, the Russian reaction to the events in southern Kyrgyzstan, for me, is a huge question. And the answer I tend to give to their lack of reaction is that Russia has somehow lost ground, lost understanding, lost at least political will to do something in this region, even though Beijing keeps calling Russia in Central Asia as a diplomatic and a security power. And I will end on Russia, not to go through all the list that I still have. But I think Russia still have huge cards to play in the region, because the vast majority of the populations there still speak Russian, still watch Russian television, still compare in many countries, not in all, but in many countries, compare the poor situation of their healthcare system today and their education system with the good standards they have in the Soviet times. And Russia should learn a little bit maybe from the Brits and the French, how you deal and how you play a cultural card. Or, as we like to say in Brussels, how you play the soft power card. But when you live in Brussels, you hear this expression too much. But for the Russians, it would be good to think a little bit of their role in the region as a soft power. And the last point I would like to make, as a huge force of the region, is the strength of its youth. It is a region where, I think in Uzbekistan, about 70% of the population is under 30 years of age. It is a huge resource, and the youth has still been well educated. But now there is a tendency in many of the states of the region not to follow up with education as it should be followed up with. And this is both a huge chance for the region and also a huge challenge, because if these youth doesn't find work, cannot get married and make families, there will be a very good ground for recruitment by all Islamist extremists that are also active in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delacroix. We will now turn this panel into an active discussion with the audience. I see your hand. I just want to add one more aspect, which none of you directly touched. The Central Asian countries are traditionally Muslim cultures. And in my experience of living in Uzbekistan, this is extremely moderate Muslim culture. Majority of these countries, I believe, or majority of population in these countries would like to continue their national and cultural identity in a secular state, which in comparison to, I would say, aggressively invading trends that I'm experiencing in Afghanistan, especially during Ramadan period, is a huge contrast. Huge contrast. And there's more coming from Iran and Pakistan, of course, that also nobody mentioned among you. There's a strong presence of India also in Central Asia, growing, I should say. So I tend to view Central Asia as an excellent opportunity of a region where the Western and Muslim cultures could try to learn to coexist peacefully. Is there a way, or do we have to follow the predictions of Huntington about the clash of civilizations? But these are going to be the next challenges. And let's turn to the audience. Yes, sir?
Hello. Okay. Thank you, distinguished panelists. I'm a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, and I was this year 2 months the head of OSCE ODIHR observation mission for elections in Tajikistan. And first of all, I wanted to say that probably without a successful OSCE chairmanship of Kazakhstan, there would not be this panel today here. And so this is also expressing my attitude towards your presidency. Now, additionally, I think that this region has a number of challenges which basically you have been touching upon in your discussion. Because I think that one of the biggest challenges looking from the security perspective is that this region is not enough attached and integrated neither among themselves, neither with outer world. And I would like to say that also our European Union or European attitude frequently towards the region has been with sporadic teaching and short arrivals and ignorance in the rest of the time. And this is why we see that our influence is not enough big here to try to solve those issues which are in the region and which are sometimes, in my view, actually reflecting a very difficult choice between more democracy and more stability. I would like to see how we could unite this, but if our involvement will not be increased in the nearest period of time, then probably it will be very difficult to tackle the situation what will arise in Afghanistan after the troop withdrawal. I saw the Afghan-Tajik border, I saw the Badakhshan, and I am afraid that if the internal integration of these countries, the conflict dispute, is not assisted to solve, then this movement will come up north, and all countries around will be losers. China, Russia, region itself, European Union, and also the last thing what you touched about the secular state, where actually the region is a very good example, along with such countries as Azerbaijan and Turkey, of secular state and a little bit other, let's say, cultural background, might also be challenged. So there's a lot of challenges because of this ignorance and not ability to influence, too much teaching, too less understanding. And we know where we ended up with too much ignorance in Caucasian countries 2 years ago. I have to blame also our attitude there. If we would be with a deeper involvement, what we have been actually arguing in European Union for the last 5-6 years, maybe that war would not happen. So who will answer me? And I'm looking here basically to presidency, to also Jan, and also to the letter for answer. How do we try to tackle the rising issue of troop withdrawal from Afghanistan and the issues of not paying enough attention to the region? Thank you.
Any volunteer? Yes.
Well, on the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, at Crisis Group, you probably know, Minister, that we have a very clear answer to that. It's difficult to move out, leaving a country in chaos behind. So once you said that, you haven't resolved many things. I think what is going on now, and the Minister Kubish on the line, is the quiet discussions with some parts of the Taliban. I would prefer to speak of some council of elders who are in touch with the Taliban. The Taliban are not a very structured, organization with one line of command. It's very scattered around the regions. But withdrawing the troops with Afghanistan in the same situation as today, I would say would be irresponsible from NATO member states. But also the neighbors of Afghanistan and the Central Asians and the Russians and the Chinese have played games all the time. Yes, you can fly over our territory. No, you can't. Mr. Karimov closing down the American bases in Karachi very quickly. Okay, I think the NATO countries have to ask all the leaders in the region, do you want to have the Taliban again as your neighbors? If you don't, you stop playing games, because our public opinions are not taking the death anymore. You guessed with my accent that I'm French. France with Britain are two countries in Europe that are pretty tolerant about losing soldiers abroad. 2 years ago, when we had the soldiers killed in Afghanistan, I don't remember in my whole life such emotion all over the country. With the widows on TV all the time, and the debate is there. And last week it was Spain. You take any Spanish newspaper, it's all over the first pages, and immediately the debate, should we stay there? Particularly in the Spanish issue, big questions of how this happened. Someone who had received the Spanish citizenship, working with the Spanish troops, suddenly opens fire, was infiltrated by the Taliban. And how to tackle this is extremely difficult, but I think the NATO countries alone cannot solve it. And you mentioned Pakistan. Well, Pakistan has been playing games for long, and it is a bit surprising to see that the US have not been able to rein Pakistan in from the beginning of the attacks on Afghanistan. And I will end here, not to be too long. But for instance, President Musharraf at that time was promising all the time that he was tackling all the crazy preachers in the madrasas. 2003, our group published a report. We had our analysts in Pakistan attending Friday prayers all over these, touchy mosques and madrasas. And none of these preachers had been changed. We put that in a report, as usual, public report. We did our advocacy on that and no change. But it is clear that the ISI commitments with the Taliban is directly responsible for the death of NATO soldiers. And it would be good if at some point some of our political leaders would say that bluntly to the leadership of Pakistan.
Sure.
Since I was addressed directly, very, very briefly. The question was about how to cope with the factor of withdrawing the military presence of the alliance from Afghanistan in certain foreseeable future. How to cope with the impact of this? Well, in my opinion, two elements. First of all, don't focus only on Afghanistan. When looking at the situation, try to find solutions, not only from the perspective of what is happening in Afghanistan, but from the perspective of the whole region. That's one thing. Secondly, go first for regional solutions. Engage the countries of the region, try to create certain mechanism. As you can see, this understanding is growing. Some 2 or 3 years ago, you witnessed and now continuous process of engagement of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. As of 2 years, basically, there was a second meeting recently engaging Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Russian Federation, and Pakistan, and other axis. In a way, return of Russia to dealing directly with certain solutions. So that will be a second point. You need a honest broker, you need a sort of umbrella, you need the United Nations. But that should be still very much a regional process, very much a regional process, engaging all the neighbors, etc. But not without Afghanistan. So one of the flaws of some other concepts are that they still look at Afghanistan as a sort of object of attention. There must be a part of the solution. The withdrawal in some foreseeable future is the fact of life. I'm afraid that whatever are the concepts you mentioned, the situation of all of the countries, literally all of the countries that are now from the Western Alliance that are now providing troops, sooner or later you will have countries saying thank you very much. You, the rest, do something, and there will be less and less of the rest. So that's the process that's going on. Whatever you call elders and the Taliban is coming back. It will be a part of the equation. I'm not sure maybe the solution is as such, but nevertheless, it's a fact of life. Have a look at the peace jirga some 1 month and a half or 2 months ago in Kabul, and have a look at the statement of President Karzai. My dear Taliban, come back. That was televised all over the world in translation. Have a look at the Kabul conference 1 month and a half ago. Afghanization of the process, call it this way or that way. But it means that the influence of certain ideologies will be increased also in the neighboring countries. So again, you have to tackle the situation, bringing them together, trying to find solutions, and we should help them in finding solutions. One point about secular states and combining the Muslim religion that is prevailing, different kind, different, with our Western, because that was the terminology used, with Western approach. I will just note one thing here. Many countries, many leaders of the countries, they see as their role model for the future, not necessarily this track. They mostly speak about Asian model of how to proceed. Asian model. And they refer very often to Malaysia, to Singapore, etc. So it's just a point, not necessarily this merger, this marriage. President Nazarbayev said, we are Asians. President Karimov said, we are Asians. I think that you will hear more of these lines in the future. Thank you very much.
Of course, Mr. Chigalo.
Thank you very much. And, thank you very much for your questions. You know, there are a number of issues to be raised, and it's already been raised about first clash of civilization, yeah? Afghanistan, of course, the lack of attention to the region, then the democracy and stability, and so on. So a number of issues.
Regional
Yes. So first, about, Afghanistan, the issue of Afghanistan to be accomplished. I think that probably you are aware that in July in Almaty, on the sites of informal ministerial, there was first ever meeting and formal meeting of international organizations in format of informal dinner. So we managed to gather together such an organizations and the United Nations organization, the European Union, the NATO, OSCE, CSTO, and SICA. And, it was quite clear for all members of this informal dinner to understand that there are a number of issues which we should sort out together. And definitely Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan are on the very top of the list. You know, just I give you some simple figures. Afghanistan, if you take their OSCE membership, it's 56 countries. And if you take also NATO, NACC, so 50 or 56 countries are the members of the OSCE. If you take 43 countries of ISAF, all these countries are members of the OSCE. So that was also one of the main reasons for us, these important issues to be raised. And of course, you know, we desperately want the OSCE to add its own added value to the possible settlement in Afghanistan. And of course, we keep in mind the activity of ISAF, the activity of the United Nations, and we want to make our added value mostly in humanitarian sphere. To give a good example to our partners, Kazakhstan especially allocated $50 million for educational program for Afghans. And we want, you know, to allocate this 50 million in order to educate 1,000 Afghani people in Kazakhstan in a foreseeable future. Then about clash of civilizations. I think it's very wise and very up-to-date question. And that is why one of our top priorities during the chairmanship was tolerance. And you know that in the end of June in Kazakhstan, there was a top-level conference on tolerance, and I think it was very successful also because we managed to invite more than 400 NGOs to take part in this conference. During last decade, we have already gathered 3 times World and Traditional Religions Congress in Kazakhstan, which is also very important for the region. Because, you know, it's a really very interesting mixture of cultures, of languages, of traditions in the region. And this is a very fragile issue. And so we should keep an eye every day on this issue. Then also the stability and democracy, very interesting question, very interesting question. You know, I think that probably you draw attention to these events in Kyrgyzstan, why it happened. Just recently, 5 years ago, when there was a tulips revolution in Kyrgyzstan, it was perceived by the majority of countries as a good example for all the other countries of Central Asia. In that time, 5 years ago, I was ambassador to the European Union in Brussels, and you know, very oftenly during my meetings, the situation in Kyrgyzstan and the Kyrgyz way been, let me say, demonstrated as a good example for all countries of the region. But what happened? The same people actually who was on the very top of the revolution, of the tulip revolution, now made another revolution in Kyrgyzstan. What is the main reason? Main reason is poverty, poor living standards in the country. So from this point of view, for me, there are 2 very, let me say, critical issues. First one, that democracy is irreversible in the region. This is first point. But secondly, you know, you should do it step by step, and first of all, you should have middle class as the main pillar for democracy in any country. This is very important. And then attention to the region and the regional cooperation. Attention to the region, you know, you are right. There is a lack of attention to the region. And let me say that during a number of years, all foreign policy of the European Union was an enlargement policy. Then suddenly the European Union recognized itself as a global player. Now it plays more and more important role in the region as well. Of course, when we are talking about the attention to the region, mostly we are talking about energy. You know that there are a lot of not only oil and gas, but also coal and uranium in the region. And because of this, also one of the most important issues to be raised, which we just touched a bit, it's of course energy security. And by the way, just on the 13th and 14th of September, there will be a very important conference in Vilnius. And upcoming chairmanship in the organization, the Lithuanian chairmanship, also wants to make the energy security issues one of the main priorities, and we support them in this case. Thank you.
Thank you for further clarification. There was a question here, and then there.
Hi, my name is David Merkel. I did want to touch on the democracy point in that in the introduction of a very interesting panel, we talked about Kazakhstan as managed democracy, democracy deficient. One panelist even talked about all the authoritarian leaders. But if you look at Kyrgyzstan, even before the Tulip Revolution, it was described as the island of democracy, the Switzerland of Central Asia. Then you have the influences not only of what's happened in other countries that weigh on leaders' minds, but obviously Russia and China and the sporadic interest in the region, oftentimes through optics of security or energy or a democracy project from the outside. So I wonder, also on the point about Asia, not just Europe, if we should give Kazakhstan, other countries, an appreciation that the path towards democracy is going to take a different step. I think all of us perhaps would agree that democracy is the most stable form of government, but the path there can be very unstable. And therefore, when the EU or when the US talk to the region, are we sending the wrong message that our only interest is as a democracy project and not having a broader view of the region? Thank you.
Please.
The question was about whether we should give appreciation to Kazakhstan for the way forward. Not unconditionally, because there are many things that could have been done differently, many more openings that could have been explored. So not unconditionally, but yes, if you put the question and you need a response yes or not, yes, because it's still managed, but still process of reforms, modernization, and democratization. I look at the situation from the perspective of 20 years, from the very beginning of their independence, taking into account what were the societies, what were the systems before, and also perhaps comparing it to some other countries, not only of the region, but in the world. They went through similar processes, etc. So from my perspective, yes, not unconditionally, but definitely. It's a good model. What we need to do is to work with our friends, to encourage them to go farther. But again, certain degree of control is necessary. You know, I remember very well what was happening during the Tulip Revolution. And I remember that I was discussing with our friends in the United States then that it is not a democratic revolution, whatever you would like it to be. In my opinion, it was far from it. And I was pretty much engaged during that period with what was happening. That's why Minister Zhigalov said that I stepped into the same water twice, because this time when it happened in Kyrgyzstan, I was there 2 days after the events, now with the flag of the United Nations. Right? It was not any kind of democratic revolution. And the subsequent development just has proven the fact that it was not. One of the responses we will have to find is not only how to modernize countries, and some of them were countries, but there were questions, you remember, at the beginning of the 90s, about the stability and survival as states, not only Tajikistan because of the civil war, but also countries like Kazakhstan, whether Kazakhstan would survive as the state is given. Have a look. It has, and in a very strong way. So again, perhaps there is something in this approach, in this model. Another question that we have to test and do something with is how to create a functional model of governance, of state in clannish and tribal societies. This is, I was not mentioning when talking about Afghanistan, but this is the internal part of the solution, because I was focusing on the external side. Engage the region and engage the regional power, find regional solutions. But internally, one must look into how to govern tribal societies, clannish societies, regionalized societies, and you have at least two countries there. The first was mentioned, Afghanistan. The second was mentioned as well, Kyrgyzstan. It's a clannish, tribal, regionalized society, whether you like it or not. Some others are not, more centralized, more states. So perhaps this as a response. Thank you.
Dr. Felditz?
Well, I'm very happy about this discussion now. This is actually the source of the problem. I became very, very skeptical about the export of Western democracy into the grounds of a very different civilizational cultural background. It doesn't function. Democratization is a process, and it needs some time before it's actually developed. So we cannot expect any wonders that happens during the night. At the present, in parliamentary elections that will happen on 10th of October, 105 political parties are registered in Kyrgyzstan. Now, this is, of course, not an ideological approach. It's personalities, it's money, it's even criminal mafia bosses that are trying to get into the parliament in order to accept laws that will be according to their wishes and so on and so forth. It's a very difficult problem. And in this respect, Mr. Kubiš mentioned the clan structures. The elders in the clans do have some sort of a contact, and this should be actually utilized to bring, to overcome the notion at the moment that democracy means disorder. And it is very, very, very easy to launch something of this set and say, look, at Uzbekistan, we have order, everything's happy, whoever raises the head and thinks differently goes into the prison. That's it. Now, what I said in my little contribution is that people in these countries usually still do not understand what actually democracy is. And somebody said here, middle class is missing, and so on and so forth. It's a process, and we should be patient and work very carefully. Subtle approaches, I said, are appreciated. Teaching from ex cathedra will be simply refused. Thank you.
I would like to add, if you allow me, from my own ground perspective experience, I would say these are different cultures. While we look at everything through the perspective of individual rights, the prevailing approach and the perception there in these societies, at least I can speak for Uzbekistan, I don't even want to go into Afghan story, but it's the community values are the ones that dictate how you behave, how you make your decisions, what counts and what doesn't. As a woman among strongly male-dominated societies that Central Asian countries are, I would say the factor of women is something that is very important potential in that region, or potentially explosive factor, especially when we talk about Afghanistan and reconciliation with Taliban and so on. So, yes, there are a lot of challenges, and many are different from what we see them from our point of view, from the West towards the East. I will give the word to Mr. Zhigalo for
Thank you very much.
1 minute.
Yes, half a minute. You know, just to make this bridging of women's factor in the region, we have Froza Tunbayeva as a president in Kyrgyzstan, but of course she is not the Iron Lady, it's definitely. But let me assure you, she was the only one in the leadership in Kyrgyzstan who actually was in favor of Mr. Bakiev to be sent out of the country. All the others refrained because of the upcoming elections. Probably you know it's a very open declaration, but I won't let you know. And secondly, again, she was the only one in the leadership of Kyrgyzstan who was in favor of the policy advisory group in Kyrgyzstan. Always, again, all the others refrained. So it works, it works. And then I like this word process about democracy. Definitely this is a process. You know, it takes some time. It's impossible actually to, to go to bed in one society and then to wake up in the other society. Otherwise, if you want just to make a breakthrough, you always will have this déjà vu, which Mr. Kubish mentioned. You should bring up the generation who actually got used to democracy. You should actually explain day after day what means rule of law for people. This is very important. And one of our tasks as the first Central Asian country in the leadership of this organization, OSCE, we wanted to actually to have more democracy and more rule of law in the region. Nobody asked, for example, us to have the Copenhagen conference specially dedicated to the 20th anniversary of the document. But we sponsored this conference, and the chairman in office specially spoke at this conference. And also, we want purposely to have a...
True, that was the country where you had the biggest space for freedom of speech, press, and NGOs. But this structure of a presidential family capturing all the resources of the state, political resources, economic resources, and in some countries being violent with those who refuse to give to the presidential family their business, right, is a structure that you have across the board there. Then I would say maybe to get out of the democracy debate, because democracy is not only elections, I would say let's focus on what states deliver to their citizens, A, and B, what kind of control you have on the money the presidents make. And I think, without talking about democracy, this is a huge challenge for all of the governments there. Because we are all in the age of internet. They can all go on the internet and see how much oil and gas Kazakhstan has sold, and they can know what is the market price for that. So I think rather than focusing on democracy and elections, which is indeed complicated, if we take these two issues into account, I can tell you I don't know any of my friends in these 5 countries who are very happy with what is going on on these two issues. The elder ones, as I said before, compare with the Soviet times. And they compare favorably for the Soviet Union, which is a big challenge for the governments there. But I think we have to be careful, those who live in democratic societies, not to be too easily giving that away simply because the debate has become a little bit biased, particularly with this missionarism of the Bush administration to bring democracy abroad through the gun, which cannot function, of course.
Thank you. I think I'm going to give more time to the audience and their questions.
My name is Dorian Maršić. I'm a director of the International Trust Fund for Demining and Mine Victim Assistance, ITF. I don't have a question, just a brief information about, it's very much related to the panel's title, because it has with the regional security, with the regional cooperation in Central Asia, and because the project is actually a challenge. It is an OSCE project on regional cooperation on humanitarian mine action. Actually, the idea on regional cooperation was coming from the state parties, from the states, from Central Asia, and OSCE, of course, is an umbrella in covering this kind of process and organization of establishing a body that is very much similar to what was going on in Southeastern Europe in this sense. We have established Southeastern Europe Mine Action Coordination Council, where it was very much, let's say, successful organization and body dealing with humanitarian mine action. The project, it's financed by the OSCE and supported by the OSCE Secretariat, the OSCE office in Tajikistan, and supported also by the Slovenian foreign ministry. It was divided in two phases. In the first phase, a lot of consultation and workshops and conferences on these issues organized during these 3 years. And the last part, of course, where there is a challenge, of course, and the objective is to obtain the letters of support from OSCE countries. It means participating also Afghanistan in this process, and to prepare a joint statement to establish Central Asia Mine Action Coordination Council, which will be having an office in one of the countries of Central Asia, and that joint statement would be put forward at the next summit in Astana. The next part of our job, ITF is contracted by the OSCE, of course, to facilitate the process, would be to, with a formal consensus of at least 3 countries, to establish a smaller permanent secretariat in that office, of course, and to develop strategies and common projects. Of course, at the end of the day, the success of this for us, very important projects of regional cooperation and confidence building within the states, it is upon the countries, if their will, of course, to participate and to establish such a common body. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I saw another hand somewhere there. Okay. Dr. Nargiza.
Thank you very much for this great panel. I'm Nargis Kasyanova from Kazakhstan, and I have a lot of questions, but I'll be selective. Questions and remarks. First, well, the Dr. Fleck's remark about your skepticism about the export of political models, and I would agree with that, but I believe in the import of political models because there is no need to invent a bicycle in a way. And in this department, I wouldn't say we were very successful in importing successful Asian or European models. Well, that leads me to the question to Mr. Kubiš. You talked about the managed process of modernization and encouragement that European Union can do. And the European Union is increasingly seeing itself as a possible source of modernization for the region. What leverage can the EU use while it's encouraging Central Asian governments? That's one question. Then the remark, well, also Mr. Kubiš said that, Karimov said that, well, basically the Central Asians consider themselves Asians, but in case of Kazakhstan, it's a bit more complicated. Yeah, President Nazarbayev said that we're Europeans. So, Minister Zhigalov also made an interesting list of small Central Asia, so 4 Central Asian states without Kazakhstan, then big Central Asia, all 5, and then bigger Central Asia with Afghanistan, where we possibly can include Xinjiang as well. Yeah, kind of big Central Asia. So, yeah, and it would be interesting for me actually to hear from Minister Zhigalov what he thinks will be a long-term trend in terms of where Kazakhstan sees itself, either inside the region or outside the region in 10 years. I understand that your diplomatic status will make it difficult for you to address this issue. So, well, I have more questions, but I guess I'd better.
Thank you. Shall we start with Mr. Kubiš?
I'll do it very quickly.
Dr. Follets, I think, was the first one.
I understood that this was a comment, not a question. Yeah. So export, import, fine with me. Thank you.
Mr. Kubiš.
I'm very grateful that we are not moving into a discussion on democracy, because in my intervention I avoided any statement concerning the quality of democracy, etc. It's about more the process. And I very much agree with the approach. Let's define democracy by what is bringing to the people, citizens, non-citizens, but to the people. Whether it brings more freedom, economic freedom, political freedom, more justice. If that brings increasingly more development in this area, it's fine, right? Because I believe in this kind of real democracy. We imported the election, we imported the ombudsman institution instead of using the traditional institutions of reconciliation in the societies in different countries like Mahalas, etc., to Central Asia. Most of them, they don't work. They are necessary as a part of the process, as instruments, elections. You cannot do without them in any society simply. But it's indeed, it's what are the results, what is the process, what are the results, and whether they are moving the situation forward. So I never said that let's drop the model of this, let's go for another. I like very much the approach, instead of discussing democracy, to discuss, okay, is it good for the common people and for the country or not? This is something. So that's one point. I'm not speaking on behalf of the European Union. I can't. I am now representing the United Nations. So what I am saying now, it's basically all of my interventions are my personal. This is my personal opinion. It's only on the parts dealing with what the UN is doing might be considered as some sort of official position. Leverage. I don't like the approach of leverage. Sometimes it is necessary to talk, to push, to come with incentives. But leverage is basically pressure. What I see, at least in some countries, is their own understanding then that they need to move in certain direction. Not all of the countries, not all of the leaders, and we know how important is the role of leaders in Central Asia. But many of them, they see this. They are encouraged, and this is the strongest and should be the strongest leverage, by the newly born entrepreneurs, civil society, women, etc. This is there. The press, if they can function. There are some countries you cannot find anything, at least they cannot work openly. Then perhaps one can add the international. And then you have leverage that is, again, coming from their accession to different treaties and norms, etc. Then you have a legitimate way how to do this. And then the third, if they would like to cooperate, this might be one of the leverages, well, then you have two to tango, and you have to accept that, okay, I cannot work with you if you are doing this. Not necessarily only in the area of commerce, for example, but also in some other areas. This is part of the dialogue of the European Union with the countries of the region, and will remain a part of the dialogue of the countries of the EU, but not only the EU, with the countries of Central Asia. So it's not only one-sided, okay, we have interest in economic trade, etc., cooperation. The EU is always bringing also other elements of political, human rights, values, relevance. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, so I want to conclude the panel by adding my question to you two, giving you the podium as the only Central Asian representative. Turning the question around, we're in Europe. What can Central Asian countries offer to the European Union, to Europe? What are you willing to offer? What can you share with us?
Thank you very much. So I'll try to make a combination of my answer for two questions. First question, it's where actually we see the country in long-term perspectives, and the second one, it's what is the Central Asian added value to Europe, yeah? So it will be the combination in my answer. So let me first to say that, of course, Kazakhstan, which is the number 9 largest country in the world in terms of territory, located mostly in Asia, as you know. But the part which is located in Europe equal, let me say, half of Poland. So it's not a small piece of land, believe me. Secondly, let me say that the main trade partner for Kazakhstan is the European Union 5 years in a row. Our trade turnover last year was 30 billion US dollars, and in 2008, 30 billion euros. You see, even taking into consideration this global economic and financial crisis, it's not bad. And let me again add that the trade turnover of Kazakhstan with the European Union is much bigger than trade turnover of all other Central Asian and Caucasus countries taken together. So it's definitely explanation that we consider the European Union to be a very important partner of Kazakhstan, and that is why we also have the state program, Path to Europe. But how we consider ourselves, I think that after some quotation of my president, I also probably I'm able to quote him as well. During the last ministerial meeting of the OSCE in Kazakhstan, he started his speech with these words: "I welcome you here in the heart of Euro-Asia." So we consider us to be Eurasian. We are lucky that we have a very special Kazakh way. What is our added value? I think that first, and I think it's not disputable, it's energy, of course, and definitely we are interdependent as downstream and upstream countries. We are interdependent, but Kazakhstan already at the moment is number 3 non-OPEC country, the most important suppliers countries for the European Union. In some countries, actually, our supply of oil is 25, for example, this is in Austria, or even more, 30%. Kazakhstan not only want to export oil and gas, but we also want to invest in infrastructure of the European Union. And for example, the biggest investment of Kazakhstan in the European Union, this is Rompetrol in Romania. It was a 2.5 billion US dollars investment. It's not bad for the young country. Then finally, I think that also one of the main achievements, in particular not just Central Asia, but my country, this is tolerance. And this is definitely our added value also to Europe as well. That is why, touch wood, we are very proud that in Kazakhstan, you know, we have more than 120 different ethnic groups. And you see that if you compare it with some other regions, we managed actually to create a model which gives us to live in peace. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists, and let's express the hope that next year we can bring all the representatives of Central Asian states here. That's your task, Mr. Zhigalo. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.